All right, we're gonna let you in on a little secret here. Kyle and I just had, we have conversations all the time, and later, like Kyle, I know that you were like, we should hit record, or we should have been talking about this, and so what we want to do is we want to fill you in on a conversation that we've been having on and off, and it has to do with like empire building, and really the question that's going to come out in this in this, we're going to spill the beans early on, is going to come down to understanding our whys on our decisions in terms of investing or business, or where you want to store your wealth. Like we continually talk about that mindset idea here on this podcast because it is extremely important on making decisions, especially when you start planning things out. Because Kyle, when we were talking, I think we were talking about, we continually buy real estate, and we're making money in our operations, our business operations, much like our listener here, who is probably, they have their day job or they own their own business, they're an entrepreneur, and they're generating money inside that business or inside that corporation, and then they're like, I want to put it somewhere. So people are trying to decide, this is what we talk about here: how do I put it in a container so that I pay less tax? These are all the kind of secrets we talk about. But now we're zooming out to kind of go, okay, let's talk about some of the structures that are in place and some of the decisions about earning that money. What do we do with that money? Because what you said to me when we think about us building our businesses is, eventually you're like, I've been building a business, or I've been, buying real estate. I've been becoming a real estate investor, but then you're like, I don't know if I want to be like a real estate, like build a real estate empire.
Right.
That's kind of like where this discussion went. And I'm like, huh, you're right. Like every time I buy a property, it goes into the pot of properties. And if you think about fast forwarding that, and if I keep doing that, eventually you will have to have an empire. And it's like, do you want to have an empire? Because you have to run an empire.
Hmm.
And if you're doing this over here to generate your money, you're now going to be competing with your empire that you're
Yeah.
trying to run, which brings up the question of like, what is it that I really want? And where do I really want to store the money? Do I want to build an empire of real estate, or do I want to build an empire of my business? Because I don't think I can do both.
Right. Well, and I think that's the part that really hit me, because you sort of, I said it. I talked about this idea of building an empire, and we were talking specifically about real estate and buying properties. And, we were just kind of revisiting our personal beliefs work. And,
Mm-hmm,
as
mm-hmm.
we've said many times before, this is work, and it changes and it evolves over time. So even if you think you nailed it and you've got it down, you're like, I know exactly what I want. Well, guess
Change.
what? 2 years from now, that's going to shift a little bit, because you're a little bit of a different person. You're at a different point in your life. You're at a different point in your businesses. You're at a different point in your portfolio. And,
Totally.
it kind of, I had an epiphany, because I realized in that moment, we had a long discussion prior to it. We were talking about all our businesses, including the real estate business, which again began as an investment, right? So, like when
Mm.
Matt and I came together, we came together to invest in real estate together. And I don't think, at the time we would have ever articulated it as a real estate business. And
Right.
what it has become is a real estate business. And we have properties in that business, but we also have other businesses. You and I, John, specifically have two other active businesses happening.
Yes.
And Matt has his own active business happening for, being a realtor and actually being involved in the transactions of real estate property. And you start to look and zoom out and go, which business, if any, do you want to
Hmm.
be an empire or an emperor
Well,
of? And I think it hit me that I don't know if I'm getting the same joy out of growing
okay.
the business of real estate. I love stacking those properties, John. The like finding deals
It
and
does feel
stacking
good
properties.
because
I
you're
love
building
that.
assets. It makes sense. You're building assets. But let me ask you this. What makes you think you have a real estate business? Because if I'm listening right now, I'm going like, well, I've been investing in real estate, but how do I know when I have do I have a business in real estate? Do I
Mhm.
not? Or should I? should I think of it as a business? Like, what makes you think you have a business or you've neglected to think that you have a business?
Well, here's what I think I'm recognizing in recent times is that as we brought in a couple JV partners and things like that, that I'm like not getting the joy out of the work, but it is work because then you're actually like, you have to be very diligent in your reporting, right? So I'm every month sending out, sorry, John, I don't do it for you because you're, you're like
Yeah.
not,
What are you talking about? I don't get every month
yeah,
anything.
John gets every semi-annually is when John gets his reports. But for, we have two other JVs that I'm picturing in my mind because I just did their reports recently. And these two individuals are people that we know but not as well, and we're not in any other businesses together. So we do a monthly report for them. And as I'm doing this work, and you look and you see a number is higher than usual, you go, wait a second, why is that? If the expense is higher, you got to go and figure that out and go, well, how do we do that better next time? As soon as you start asking yourself those questions, when you go, how do we do that better? Like that's a business thought, right? Like
Right.
that is now, up until we had joint venture partners, I would argue that we dealt with it as an investment and maybe too passively, meaning we were potentially leaving money on the table for ourselves simply because we weren't committing the time and effort into managing the numbers, like not managing the properties, but managing the numbers
Well,
to go, is this a profitable property from a cash flow perspective? Like the numbers when we bought it all makes sense, but ongoing, as we put more and more money into a property, is there, at what point does it make sense for us to go, it's time to move on from this product? Like that's what a business does, right? They go, we
right.
have this product that we're going to sell. And then eventually it's like, maybe the margins get thin on it. And you go, wow, we're putting a lot of time and effort and energy into this particular product. Maybe it's time for us to take that product off the shelf. And the same should be true for an investment portfolio, a real estate investment portfolio. And I would argue that we, Matt and I specifically, have not done that for ourselves, but we do that for our JV partners. And that's the part where we start to now look back at ourselves and say, wait a second, we have a real estate business. And only when other investors come in, to the picture, does it seem like we're running it like a business. But here's the part that hurts my soul even more, John, is I don't enjoy that part, which is probably why I wasn't doing it for myself. Like I was
Right.
like, I was looking at
You're
it as a
avoiding it.
passive investment, and what will happen will happen. And I've been happy with the results so far. But when you have to report to quote unquote shareholders, right? A JV
Yep.
partner would be a
Sure.
shareholder in a way of
Yep.
that property or that business. You're now starting to look at things a little differently. You start to realize where things are going really well and where things are not going so well. And then you start to run it like a business. And I don't know, John,
Well,
I'm on the fence here as to whether like I really want to grow that side of the business or whether I'm just into stacking assets and sort of sitting back.
yeah. Yeah, and that's the question I think you have to answer because you're at the point where you are forced into the empire. Like you're at a point where you have many properties that you've stacked over the years, many doors, and each of those doors take managing, even though we talked about this in one of our earlier episodes about aligning your team, having your team, and part of that team was having a property manager. But we know that managing, like, a property manager manages, say, the tenants, but the property manager oftentimes needs managing. And when you start continually, or if you continually stack those assets, the more properties or the more doors you have, the more managing that the property manager needs. And now all of a sudden you've got like a part-time job that I'm now organizing, managing, tracking, following up with the property manager. And you've built this empire that you may or may not have wanted from the beginning. You've got no choice but to try to and you're probably just maintaining. You're not even growing the business because you're not thinking about it as a business, but now you're forced into thinking about it as a business because a long time ago you were just like, I'm going to stack some assets.
Right.
But now you're in a position where, like, okay, so if I want to continue stacking assets in this fund or this investment portfolio, as you originally called it, you now are actually forced into going, I have to treat this like a business, which means
Mm-hmm.
I now need to do the thinking that business people do. Like I need to think about the six functions of businesses. I need to think about what is my vision? What do I want in terms of growth? What does my 5-year plan look like? What does my 10-year plan look like? What are the marketing aspects I'm doing here? Like in terms of marketing might be like, how do I generate, leads and revenues, and how do I find deals? Like these are seats that all have to be filled. You love finding deals. Like that part is great for you. But another seat that you need filled is like operations. Like we need an operations manager in a way. They like, okay, I have a property manager, but they don't care about my business.
Yeah.
If I'm going to treat it like a business, I need someone who's invested enough to go, I want to see growth in this business. And therefore, I'm going to make decisions based off that growth. A property manager won't do that for you. They'll just like
Totally.
figure out an easy solution, but they're not going to think about what solution should I pick so that the growth of the business meets the goals of the business. And that's just one of those seats. Like you've got financing, you've got
Mm-hmm.
many seats that all of a sudden have to kind of be filled. And if you're not ready for that, it's kind of like you've got this house of cards or this mess of portfolio
Yeah.
that you're just trying to like manage day to day. And here's the real kicker is if you don't like it, you're every hour you spend managing that, and especially because you're a business owner in another field that makes, your revenue and your income, your family income, and you're trying to make that business grow. Every hour you spend over in this empire you built over here, even though you didn't maybe want to build an empire, or maybe you did, but you just didn't think about it, that you were building one at the time, takes an hour away from this business,
Mm-hmm.
which probably fulfills you, makes you happy, and gives you a sense of purpose, and you can see growth over here. And now you're left going, oh my God, like every
Yeah.
hour over here is drudgery, but every hour over here is not. So how do I hire someone to fill my seat? Like that's what a business owner might do. They'll figure out, how do I fill the seat to do the things that I don't want to do? And then it leads me to do the things I do want to do. But again, you're in an empire building. So now you have to go like, okay, well, if I fill that seat, I'm in this business building mode, but do I want to keep going in that? Like, is that
Right.
where I want to spend? Like, do I want to build the empire? I mean, that's the original question is, do you want to keep going in that? Because that's what's going to happen if you fill the seat, you have to kind of think about it. So it's like rewind to Kyle, who's buying his first home in Florida. And Kyle's like, I want to stack assets. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I should be buying real estate. But you didn't think probably down then. It was like eventually, by following this pattern that I'm going to do, I'm going to have to own this business that's an empire, a real
Mm-hmm.
estate empire. And because if you fast forward from where you are 10 more years from now, you're going to keep going in this way. You've got a huge empire, and that's going to be your full-time job.
Totally, totally. And we've talked about it before. And actually, recently, I've been on a couple different podcasts, and they were asking, and I've been kind of giving this sort of like answer, or at least throwing this out there to their audiences, where I've been saying is like really trying to help yourself understand, do you want to leave your current job so you can take on a job in real estate investing? Because that's
That might be for you
ultimately
though, right? Like that might
totally,
that might be
totally.
somebody like, I'd love
Eh,
to do that as my, like we were at a real estate kind of get together a couple months ago, and we were talking with a couple at that, and they had quit their job and they were managing properties, and they sounded super happy.
Right.
Like if that's what you want, then that's what you want.
Totally, totally. And I'm like, hey, to each their own. And this is, I think, the hardest part about the journey is that, you know, when I go all the way back to Rich Dad Poor Dad, as you mentioned, and when I was going to buy that first property, I mean, it's been a while since I read that book, but I'm going to guess inside there, they probably said, you got to run this like a business, right? And I was probably like, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Probably.
Like I'll figure that out. What does that mean? And you're going to have to learn this as you go. And I'm sure there's some people listening who are in an interesting spot. And here's what I think is most difficult. It's like with any business, it doesn't matter if there's a business, like in every business, there's going to be parts of it. And I think about Rocket Fuel, and I think about, some of these books like the Gino Wickman
Traction.
books, Traction, and talking about, EOS, and we had Ian Murray on recently for an interview where he's, helps you through a coaching process to do all of this work. Every business has parts that you're going to like and parts that you're going to hate. And finding the right people is the key. But here's like, that is so, it sounds so simple, but that is not simple. Like to find the people on your team to build any business, that is a really important thing that you have to work through. And one of the hardest parts, I think, is learning more about yourselves. And what I mean by this is way back then, and even until recently, I knew certain things about myself, but I didn't know everything about myself. So one thing that I'm noticing about myself is like, I first of all, I like control. That's part of
Mm-hmm.
why I like to
Mm-hmm.
own property myself instead of, say, putting money into a fund, right? Same asset class, but it's different. Like I don't get to go to the fund and say, hey, I want to sell now. Even though I'm not a big person that looks to sell and flip, it's like I like to know that that option is available to me, right? Probably part of my, financial security sort of, primal question that I have. So that's one of those things. But then another thing is like, I also don't like the process of spending money. And I've said it on episodes before. Like, I'm not the type of person that goes out and buys a lot of things. And the reason why is because I don't enjoy it. So, something interesting about the portfolio that Matt and I sort of started building on was buying the ugly duckling properties that required capital to be put into them. That now, looking back at it, sounds like a really poor idea for a guy who doesn't like the process of spending money, even if I could justify it on paper. Like, even if I could put on paper that, hey, if I put 20 grand into this, it's going to be worth that. It's like I still don't like the process, especially when things start going. So right now we've got
Right.
quotes in for windows at one of the property. I'm looking at the quotes and I'm going, I don't know how much windows cost, like let's get a couple quotes. And then you look at them and you're like, I'm like, I don't know, like install them. Like, like it's like in my head, I'm going, holy smokes, if I knew what I knew now about myself, I might start investing in different types of real estate property, maybe
Mm,
property that won't require as much work to be done to the property, even if it means that I would actually be building more equity in. So, all this to say, like, I have no regrets for how we got to where we got to now. But for those people who are either in the process, maybe you're in it right now and you're trying to figure out, like, where am I? Like, you might have these crazy thoughts of like, I either want to sell it all because something doesn't feel right about it, or it's like
mm-hmm.
it's you're not sure or not certain. It could simply be because maybe I'm investing in the wrong properties. Like I don't have to buy apartment buildings or multifamily or quadplexes. Like you get to decide what it is
Sure.
and what's going to bring you the end result, which isn't just financial and it's not just return based, but it's more or less is like what's going to help you get closer to that longer term goal and what's going to help you feel good about it throughout the process so that you don't constantly feel like that energy is being sucked from you. Because I'll be
Right.
honest and say, in the past 6 months or so, as we've been scaling other businesses that I love working in and I spend all of my time working in, what ends up happening is I spend all my energy there because I love it, and then I leave the managing stuff for our properties last. And then I'm like, oh, and then it hurts even harder, right? Where it's
Right.
like, now I got to deal with this thing. It's like I saved it for last, which is probably the worst possible idea, but it's kind of that's why we procrastinate. I don't want to deal with that stuff. So now it's like, okay, what does that look like and sound like? How do we take what we have? Do we restructure? Do we maybe shift capital from certain types of properties to other
Right.
types of properties? Or maybe we look at different asset classes now that we've gained a certain amount of wealth through this asset class. Do we maybe slowly, decumulate some of these properties and put them into things that are just going to give you a steady Freddy return without much thought or effort involved?
See, what I like what you're saying right now is the fact that you're trying to make those decisions is you're actually because you just realized, and it sounds funny that you've been doing this for a long time, and it sounds like you're just realizing that, and you said it here on this podcast today that you just realized that your investment portfolio needs to be a bit like you never really thought of it as a business, even though you had people that you had to report to, but I mean, that's the way you're thinking I think, as of today in the future, because what you just said is what business owners do when they make their goals, their quarterly goals, their 3-year goals, their 10-year goals. They're trying to decide, what do I want 3 years to look like in terms of my business? And then how do I reverse engineer that to make sure I get there? Like, what quarterly goals, what annual goals do I need to make so that I get there? And what are the quarterly goals? What are my rocks,
Mm,
from traction, when they say, like, what are the rocks that we need to do? And then what seats need to be filled? Like, do we even have the right seats filled to get to the goal that we want? And your goal that you just kind of like threw out there was like, I think I'm realizing that what got us here is not where I want to go. So I,
mm,
I don't want to do, because I don't maybe have the right people in the right seats. Because I don't want to do the managing, and I want someone else to do the seats. And either I fill the seat or I have to then fill the seat myself, which a lot of business owners do. You're now going, if I am going to sit in that seat, like manage the property managers, then how do I do less of that? Which is like, how do I shift the goals of my business to go, I'm now going to sacrifice maybe potential gain on deals for easier management. And your goal, my next 3-year goal is going to be to slowly transfer the percentage of my portfolio from, maybe you're going to label dumps, into nicer properties. And you're like saying, oh, look, I've got these like 2-star properties, and now I'm going to only buy 4-star properties or 3-star
mm,
properties, and my portfolio balance is going to change in the next 3 years. Like, that's what a business owner would decide to do.
right.
So you're trying to make that decision now. It's like, now we just need to like think of this as a business. And so, like, the takeaway that I'm having here, and maybe I want to leave for the listener right now, is if you are, say, managing different businesses right now, like we are, and you have real estate as part of portfolio, if you're not yet thinking about it as a business, start. Because
Mm,
eventually, the house of cards might come crashing down, and you're going to all of a sudden have to trade hour for hour in the business that you want to work in. And maybe, again, like I said, maybe you have a T4 job, and your goal is actually to transfer to be that as your main business. Because that's
right.
that's actually what, Robert Kiyosaki says he wanted to do. Like, that was his goal, was that, you remember, he said, no matter what business you're in, your real business his real business was real estate. Like, he saw himself as the empire builder in
Yeah.
real estate. He's like, I'm going to transition, and that's where my goal is going to be. But that's not where your goal wants to be. So
Right.
now you're trying to think, how do I manage both? Because now I do have a business. But stepping into that world, if you're like, I haven't bought a real estate property, just know that if you are buying one, fine. But if you're going to say, like, my strategy is to buy and dump my capital into real estate deals, you are running a business. So start thinking of it like one.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. And really what it requires. And here's something interesting in the book that came to mind, because I think you said it, which is the title of the book. And it says, What Got You Here Won't Get You There by Marshall Goldsmith. And both you and I, John, read this book recently, based on a suggestion from Todd, right? So from a
Yes.
business coach, and fantastic book that highlights some challenges in business. But what's interesting is that over time, if we think about things like a business, and again, this is me sharing what I think I'm learning more recently. This isn't me trying to be all like I'm super wise and I've been doing this all along, because I haven't. I'm sharing what I'm recognizing about myself, and that I'm realizing that when you run, and we'll talk specifically about real estate, your portfolio like a business, you're removing emotion from the decision making process, right? And what it requires you to also do. So while a business is for profit, right? So we want to gain profitability. We want it to cash flow, and or we want equity to rise, right? We want those two things. The other thing that we have to go back to, and we have to be okay with, is that sometimes when you set out on a journey, when I set out for real estate, I wanted to grow my portfolio and grow more and more doors to grow wealth. That's fine. But that should shift over time. And I think that's the part too, that as you look at things through a business lens, you also have to zoom out and start to think about, why did I do what I did? And when you said what got you here won't get you there, is it possible that you could be a successful real estate investor and eventually get to a place where you shuffle part of your portfolio, where you completely sell your entire portfolio because it got you to where you wanted to get to. And now you have a different, end goal.
Right.
Or maybe it's a little bit of both. And I think what I'm starting to recognize about myself, and I can't speak for you, Jon, I can't speak for Matt, but for myself, I think I'm always going to want to have real estate and owning property myself with maybe small group like we are here. I think I'm always going to want that. But now I'm shifting, going like the type of property may look and sound really different. Like it might not be about the property generating the cash flow for my lifestyle, but rather having it as a store of value, a store of wealth, and maybe the property types not having as significant a return as, say, some of the properties that we used to get us to this place in the journey. So ultimately, I share that with everyone listening to hopefully give you the permission, the grace, the maybe just the thought of analyzing where you are, whether you're beginning the journey, in the middle of the journey, or maybe you're feeling sort of like where I am right now, which is sort of like trying to get a better sense, a better handle on why I'm doing what I'm doing and whether continuing on that same path is the right move, or whether like veering on that path a little bit, like making adjustments and being okay with it because my goals have evolved over time, or maybe that I've hit a goal and now I'm ready to set a different or a new goal for the rest of the journey. Give yourself that permission to do that thinking so that you can feel good about the work that you're doing. You don't just look up one day, find yourself buried in all kinds of work, and then go, oh, shoot, I didn't realize that this was going to be quote unquote so much work. And that maybe that work, the new work that you've created for yourself, it may or may not bring you as much joy as the old work you used to do. And that's
Yeah.
something that I think we all need to be cognizant of, is that we all don't need to be full-time real estate investors in order to have success investing, be it in this asset class or any asset class.
Yeah. That's a good, I think you're sharing the secret that you now know, or the wealth secret that you wish you knew. But I mean, the secret for me is thinking about that as what are the business decisions, no matter, and this is maybe the secret that I've learned over the years, that is, can I apply a business thinking to this situation? Like you may have got into, real estate investing as a as a passive source of income, or maybe a store of wealth. But if you've grown it so far, it's like, no matter whether it's small, whether it's big, whether it's medium, can you apply business thinking to the situation? And I think that can help you make clear decisions. Like we talked about, making this or thinking about business decisions early in this particular podcast, especially when we talked about analyzing deals. We used to go in going like, you got to think like a business. You got to think about profit, loss, like treat it like a business. But that was our analyzed deals. And that was like thinking about how much you're going to pay in terms of, expenses for that property, which include property manager. But then there are other things that maybe you knew that over time weren't expenses per deal. There's expenses for all the deals in a way, like your time. So no matter what situation you find yourself in, think of it as a business. What are the goals? Resort back to the goal thinking, and then whether you're in a good position to do the work that needs to be done in that business, or maybe you need to hire someone. Like, think of it like a business. So I think that's my kind of big secret, wealth secret here today, is to think about, if I do want to be an empire builder, and if so, awesome, treat it like a business and go forward. Or maybe you don't want to be an empire builder, but you have to kind of know what you're stepping forward into. And then also just going, hey, if no matter where I go, I can change my decision later in life or later in the year, but I should resort back to kind of business thinking when I go to make those choices.
I love it. I love it. Hey, friends, if you find some value in these episodes in this podcast, please do us a favor, head on over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening from and leave us a rating and review. Be honest and open, but it does help us reach more wealth secret seekers just like you. And remember, if you want to hop on a call and learn about your next best step to help you reach your own personal beliefs, reach out to us at canadianwealthsecrets.com/discovery, and we'll hop on a discovery call to figure out where you are along the journey. I always like to call it, which patio stone you are hopping along or which fence post you are coming up to so that you can reassess where you are and start looking towards the straightest path to the next fence post that you're after in your Canadian wealth secret journey.
All right, Canadian Wealth Secret Seekers. We'll see you next time. Just as a reminder, the information you heard here today is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. John Orr is a mortgage agent with Bricks Mortgage, license number M23006803. Kyle Pierce is a licensed life and accident and sickness insurance agent with and VP of Corporate Wealth Management with the PanCorp team, which includes corporate advisors and Pan Financial.